This lecture is on conducting research. So previously I've talked about the importance for writing a good paper of primary sources. And while they are a part of that, they're certainly not the entirety of it. You need solid research to write a good paper. You need to find good primary sources. You need to find good secondary sources. And finding them can be difficult. And I'm going to try and give you some hints and tips in this lecture on what has worked for me in the past. But again, remember, it's not just finding them. You have to read them carefully. You must learn something and think about what you have learned to write well. And I want to stress again the importance of intensive over extensive research, particularly primary sources. There are so many things you could read. Knowledge is all connected. You've really got to just narrow it down or you're going to go crazy because you're going to try and do too much. So the key thing here is how to use your time efficiently to find good sources as quickly as possible so that you can start reading them and taking notes on them. So just a reminder, some types of sources. There's primary sources. Those were things produced from the time period being studied. You may have noticed I repeat this a lot. It's because I keep running into people making this mistake and confusing the types of sources. Some examples of primary sources would be letters, diaries, photographs. Secondary sources typically reflect on an earlier time. Some examples would be a book written about the past or a journal article. The same source can be both depending on the topic. So for example, if I have an editorial in like 1909 talking about someone being a historical event happening in another part of the world. So if I have a document written in the United States in 1909 about something happening in Japan, if I'm focusing on that event that happened in Japan, that's a secondary source, right? The person writing that in the United States did not experience it. On the other hand, if that person if I'm focusing on how do people in the United States react to that historical event happening in Japan, then it does become a primary source. So it just depends on the topic. If you're confused, I'm happy to help you. And like I said, an example of that would be something like a newspaper editorial. It could be a secondary or primary source. So you really want to keep in your mind focus, what are you looking for, right? What is your question you're trying to answer? What is your focus? You want to stay focused to avoid information overload. I remember when I was a college student going to the library and taking down every book from the library about a particular subject, I'd end up with like 20 books. And I'm like, I can't possibly read all these books. And then it just made it hard for me to do the research project because it was like, this is so much. So you want to stay focused to avoid information overload. I think looking at primary sources first is the most important thing to do, right? Again, I think people often, and I'm saying this from my own experience as a student, I thought, okay, I need to read a bunch of books about something before I read the primary sources so I can understand what I'm reading. So then I just spent a whole bunch of time reading books, and then I got in the primary sources. A lot of what I read was not directly useful. So you actually start with your primary source. Read the primary source first to get a feel of what that source is about. Then go to the secondary sources, because now you'll know what to read and look for in the secondary sources. You'll know what you need to focus on. And then you go back to your primary sources, because now by knowing what to focus on your secondary sources, you've learned what you need to learn about the background of the primary sources. Now you can understand those primary sources more deeply. Notice you go back and forth. It's not like you're at stage 1, primary sources. Okay, I'm done. Now stage 2, secondary sources. That's not how it works. You go back and forth. For secondary sources, typically, these are there for background information, the historical context. As an aside, when you write a paper, usually you write the background last. You don't want to write it first, because until your paper is done, you won't know what to write about. So you write the background last, not first. People usually think because it comes first, you write it first. That's not how it works. But I'll go into more detail later there. But secondary sources give you the background information to better understand your primary source. They may fill in gaps from the primary source. The primary source might be about a battle, and the person writing it doesn't know who's going to win or lose. In order to write your paper, you need to know who wins or loses. So you look at the secondary source for that information. But primarily, secondary sources exist to understand your primary sources better. Remember, primary sources are the heart. So how do you find sources? Right? How do you find sources? Well, typically, one thing is to start from the information I have provided. Usually, I don't just throw out students and say, have fun. I usually try and give you a start. So you start with the information I have provided, and I'll go into more detail about how you can use that information later. Another thing you can do is talk to a professor. Sometimes students will come talk to me and say, I'm writing a paper for such and such a class, and I want to do Korea, and I want to do this subject. I want to do Korea in the Olympics. Do you know anything about Korea in the Olympics? Do you know any good books that I could look at? I certainly do, and I can tell you some good books, and you have saved some time that way. Another thing you can do is use Wikipedia. Now, I want to stress, Wikipedia is not really a scholarly source. You don't want to be using it to write your paper itself. But in terms of doing your research, Wikipedia is a wonderful source. And I will tell you, frankly, I often start when I'm researching a class or a paper, I will often start with Wikipedia because it is a nice kind of summary of available sources and references and things like that. So let's look at an example. So in 1968, basically North Korea kidnapped an American ship, the USS Pueblo, and its crew, and essentially held them hostage for quite a while. They eventually released the crew, but the USS Pueblo is still docked in North Korea. You can see there, Pueblo, North Korea, 2012. As the time of this recording, it's still there. So if you're writing a paper in a class on Korea, you may say, well, this is awesome. I totally want to research this. So you go to Wikipedia and read about it to say, is this something that you want to research? And it gives you a lot of good background information. What's wonderful about Wikipedia is at the end, they will also give you examples of similar events. So you may want to write a comparative paper. Well, this makes it very easy to do your comparison because it tells you other conflicts. This would help with comparison, right? And if you go down again, they have references. They have footnotes. So, for example, I'm sorry, there's no footnotes here, but there was a footnote here, right? There may be a footnote down here. You may say, that's interesting. You would go down here and find the footnote, and it would tell you where they got the information. And notice that a lot of these are hyperlinked. This one's a PDF, right? So you can look at these. These help you find your stuff. That's what I mean about doing research. This helps you find the information very quickly. Here are more sources. A critical oral history. Ooh, that's great. Oral history is an example of a primary source, right? Someone who went through the event talking about it. That's great. And then here's further reading. Here's some secondary sources. So you can see how efficient Wikipedia is. It can let you get a good idea about a subject, and it gives you a bunch of sources that you can access very, very quickly. So wonderful source for conducting research, not for writing your paper. You need to chase down the original sources themselves, but it's great for doing that initial research. And there are also, there's external links. It gives you even more information. So lots of good stuff if you want to use that. Interestingly enough, also, when I am doing research, I use Amazon to do research. Why? Well, you can do a search for something and you can set it so it shows you the most recent results. So let's say that I want to do research on Syngman Rhee. And this is 2020, and I find out that, there's a book about Syngman Rhee that's only about a year old. Foreign Friend, Syngman Rhee, American Exceptionalism and the Division of Korea. Okay, that's a great book. I need to see if our library has that. And here's another one, 2017, The Making of the First Korean President, Syngman Rhee's Quest for Independence. Another great book. I need to see if our library has these things. If they don't, I can get on Interlibrary Loan or Pascal or something like that. But I love how Amazon does that. It gives you an image. And also what's nice, notice it gives you information. David Fields, Associate Director of the Center for East Asian Studies, University of Wisconsin-Madison. Remember I said it's important. Who's actually writing this stuff? Well, this guy's a university professor at an important university. And it was published by the University Press of Kentucky. So I know University Press. So this is a reputable book. So that's something that is also very helpful about using Amazon for research. Also, Amazon, I'll go back. You can't see it here, but usually you can click on these and it will give you a preview. So it will even let me read part of the introduction. It shows me what the book is about. And I can see, okay, this is a book that will be useful. Or I may say, oh yeah, I'm more interested in Syngman Rhee after the Korean War. This is all before the Korean War. So this book is not useful to me. But again, Amazon is great. And also one thing I want to stress, Amazon will usually give you, it'll say like customers who bought this book also bought this, or it will give you similar books that could also be useful. So this is a good way to find information. One reason why I stress the importance of doing things by year, right, is this. Okay, this book is written in 2019. I can get that book and then use its bibliography, footnotes, and possibly a section. Sometimes they even have a section called further reading. I can see all the most recent books and things that have been published. I just saved a bunch of time. I don't have to go through a library catalog and, just randomly searching keywords, hoping I find the right stuff. I can look at what this person researched. I can look at their bibliography. I can look at their footnotes. It's especially nice if they have a section on further reading, and I can use that to do my research. Now, I need to go a little bit deeper, right? There may be something more recent. I don't want to miss that. But you're less likely to miss stuff if you start off with the most recent book. This is a way you can save a lot of time. I'm just going to go very quickly through this. You can check out books from the Lander Library, and it may have changed. The librarians are great about always trying to stay up to date, trying to find the best way to find information, to make it easier for students to find the information they're looking for. So this may change, but I just want to know, if you go to the library, you can search for particular books. You could search for this book about Sigmund Rhee. And if it's not there, right, if you found it, that's great. You can just go there and check it out. These books are here. You can go check them out. It says your book is not here. It would be here if we had it, but it's not. So why don't you click Pascal, which is a free service, which allows you to borrow books from other South Carolina libraries. Usually they can get them to you in a day or two, sometimes a little bit longer, but it's usually very quick. And when you click on that, you find out that there's an online version. So you can look at that. And there's a paper version. There's the actual book. So you can put that request in and they will send it. It is wonderful. It is really great. I often put books on course reserves. Right. So if you look on the library website, you should be able to find the course reserve section, and you can type in my name. You can also type in the name of the course, and then all the books I have put on reserve. If you're not familiar with the idea of reserve sections, the idea of putting something on reserve is I can make it so I can control how long the book is out, and I can kind of have it pulled so it's harder for people just to go in and just take the book out, and making it so my students can't get it. So when I do a class, say History 499 on Korean history, I'm going to put these books on reserve so that it's easier for my students to find them. They just go to the desk and say, I'm looking for Black Soldier of Mercy. Here's the call number. It's on the reserve desk. Can you get it for me, please? And they'll just turn around and pick it off the reserve desk, a reserve shelf. And this is a way that I can make it so it's easier to get these books, and also make it harder for other students to get them, not because I want to be mean, but because, hey, you're doing a class on this subject. You need to be able to get access to those books. Let's see. Sometimes, though, a book might not be available through Pascal. So a book may not be at the library. It may not be available through Pascal. Usually there's this thing called requests, and you can request an article or request a book. So if you click on requested book, you'll see something like this. They want you to check our collection, check Pascal, and then you click on this if we don't have it, and you can request a book through interlibrary loan. Pascal focuses on South Carolina. Interlibrary loan can be anywhere in the country. And if you click on that, it asks you to just fill out some information, and then they will see if they can find you the book. That usually takes longer, a week or two. So Pascal is better, typically. But if you can't find it through Pascal, this also works. The Jackson Library also has wonderful databases. One I use a lot is Academic Search Complete. They have a lot. There's also JSTOR, which has a lot of history articles. But you can go there. You usually have to put in your name and password. And then you can do a search, like for Salem witch trials or something like that. And then you can see if they have the article. When you do this, you want to make sure that you want the full text. And you also want to make sure that you click the peer-reviewed button. Usually you have to do the search first, and then later on, after you do the search, you can filter it. One of the filters is peer review. Right? You want to make sure that you find peer-reviewed journals because they're the most, most credible. Now, I want to go back briefly before ending just to note that you can also request articles. So let's say you're looking in this Sigmund Rhee book here, and there's an article, and you really want to get. You're like, that article that this person wrote, that's listed in the bibliography. It's exactly what I need to do my research. I need to get it. And then you go to the do a search on the database, right, on the Academic Search Complete, and you can't find it. You go to JSTOR, it's not there. That's when you would put in that article request. And usually the librarians get that within a day or two. Like I just recently did that, where there was an article about a Japanese doctor and how he tried to deal with influenza. And I wanted that article to see if it could be used in a class. And I could not get access to it. So I put in the request, and the librarians got from me right away. Our librarians are great. They're wonderful at getting you sources. So hopefully that will help you to work more efficiently. I don't ever want to make students waste time. I think that this hopefully will help you work efficiently, find the information you need as quickly as possible, and make a good paper.